The quiet town of Circleville, Ohio, sits tucked away in the American Midwest, a place where cornfields stretch endlessly under an open sky, and where neighbors greet each other with a nod, confident that nothing dark or extraordinary could ever take root in their small community. But beneath that rural calm, something sinister was waiting to unravel the very fabric of trust. At first glance, Circleville seemed safe, even idyllic. Just under 15,000 residents called it home, most working-class families, many with ties stretching back generations. It was a place of county fairs, Friday night football games, and a strong belief that everyone knew everyone else. But in the late summer of 1976, a wave of terror began. Not with bloodshed or violence, but with words. Life before the storm was simple. Mary Gillespie drove a school bus full of children every morning. Her husband, Ron, worked steadily, and together they were raising their family quietly. Friends described them as ordinary, hard-working people. But ordinary lives often hide extraordinary shadows, and it was within this ordinariness that the seeds of paranoia began to sprout. The first hints of unease arrived in the form of anonymous letters. Unmarked, unsigned, and filled with venom, the notes accused Mary of an affair with the local school superintendent. They were written in a blocky, uneven scrawl, crude, almost childlike, but their content cut deep. They threatened exposure, demanded that Mary stop her alleged behavior, and warned of consequences. At first, Mary tried to dismiss them. Prank, gossip, or maybe a cruel neighbor. But the letters didn't stop. They multiplied. And soon, others in town began to receive them too, each note tailored with intimate knowledge of the recipient's private life. Whoever was behind the letters knew things only a close insider could know. The main players in this drama emerged quickly. Mary Gillespie, the bus driver at the center of the affair accusations. Her husband, Ron, who soon found himself under mounting pressure from the threats. Paul Freshour, Mary's brother-in-law, a quiet man whose life would later be torn apart by this mystery. And, of course, the faceless letter writer, whose identity still remains a ghost in Circleville's history. Mary's life began to fracture. At work, whispers followed her. The children she drove to school sometimes repeated things they'd overheard at home. The affair allegation was spreading, but whether the rumors were true or not seemed almost secondary. The true damage lay in the fear, suspicion, and humiliation the letters were designed to create. The last days of normalcy for Ron Gillespie came in the summer of 1977. One evening, he received yet another threatening letter. But this one was different. It named him directly, warning him to put an end to Mary's supposed relationship or face the consequences. Neighbors later recalled that Ron appeared agitated, pacing and drinking more than usual, consumed by the accusations. Family members remember the tension between Mary and Ron growing unbearable. Conversations were short, meals awkward, and the cloud of suspicion hung thick. Then came the phone call. On August 19, 1977, Ron received a mysterious call at home. Nobody knows what was said, but minutes later he stormed out of the house with a handgun, telling his children he was going to confront the letter writer. That night, Ron was found dead in his truck, which had veered off the road into a tree. His weapon lay beside him, one round fired. Yet there were no fingerprints on the gun. Authorities ruled it an accident, blaming alcohol. But friends and family never believed it. They saw the crash as something far darker, possibly murder or even a staged death. The crash sent shockwaves through Circleville. If the letters had been dismissed as a cruel prank before, now they felt like a deadly warning. Residents whispered that the writer wasn't just a nuisance. They were dangerous, maybe even capable of killing. Fear gripped the town like a frost. Witnesses spoke of how quickly paranoia spread. Parents looked over their shoulders. Couples questioned each other's secrets. In a town where everyone once left their doors unlocked, locks began to click shut at night. The letters had achieved their purpose. They had turned neighbors into suspects. The community was reeling. Some believed Ron had been driven to drink and crash by despair. Others insisted he had discovered the identity of the letter writer that night. and had been silenced before he could reveal it. Theories swirled in hushed tones, each one more chilling than the last. Law enforcement tried to calm the storm. Investigators examined the gun, the crash, the notes, but forensic techniques of the 1970s were limited. Handwriting analysis offered no clear matches. Fingerprint dusting turned up nothing. And when polygraph tests were conducted on several townspeople, the results were inconclusive. The case seemed designed to resist answers. The early investigation focused on those closest to Mary. Family, friends, and co-workers were all questioned, but the more authorities pushed, the more dead ends they hit. No one confessed, no one slipped, and the letters kept coming. One by one, possible suspects were dismissed. Some had strong alibis, others lacked motive. Yet the letters contained such personal detail that police were certain the culprit was local. Whoever they were blending in seamlessly, maybe even sitting quietly at the bar, sipping coffee at the diner, or waving to their neighbor while knowing their deepest secrets. Conflicting accounts made matters worse. Some recipients swore the writer had to be a close friend. Others insisted it was a disgruntled co-worker or former lover, but nothing lined up cleanly. It was as though the author was deliberately planting seeds of confusion, ensuring suspicion spread like wildfire without ever pointing to one definitive culprit. Experts examined the letters for linguistic patterns. They noted the strange use of capital letters, odd punctuation, and a mix of anger and eerie detachment. But nothing gave away the writer's identity. Without DNA testing, which was decades away from practical use, handwriting and circumstantial suspicion were all investigators had. Police attempted to reconstruct the timeline. They looked at who was in town, who had reason to hate Mary or Ron, and who benefited most from the chaos. But as the years passed, the letters didn't stop. They escalated. Dozens turned into hundreds. Eventually, more than 1,000 were sent. The pool of suspects widened. At the center, suspicion circled back to Paul Freshour, Mary's brother-in-law. Paul was quiet, intelligent, and recently divorced from Mary's sister. Investigators wondered, could bitterness have driven him to terrorize his own family? Could his insider knowledge explain the intimate details in the letters? Motives seemed possible, but unconvincing. Paul denied everything, insisting he had no reason to target Mary or Ron. But in the absence of stronger suspects, attention clung to him. Meanwhile, others whispered that the writer wasn't targeting Mary at all, but using her as a pawn to divide the community. Alibis were tested, stories scrutinized. But each suspect seemed to exist in a haze of half-truths. Some people admitted to knowing about affairs in town but claimed no role in the letters. Others denied knowledge entirely, despite the writer's obvious familiarity with their private lives. Lies, truths, and half-truths became impossible to separate. By the 1980s, the story had taken on a life of its own. Local papers ran headlines. National outlets picked up the tale. And in living rooms across America, viewers debated the case after it aired on the hit TV show Unsolved Mysteries. Circleville was no longer just a small Ohio town. It was a symbol of paranoia, secrecy, and dread. For residents, daily life grew tense. At school, on the bus, in the grocery store, the question hung in the air, who is the writer? Was it a jealous neighbor? A betrayed spouse? A scorned lover? Or someone no one would ever suspect? The anonymity gave the writer power, and that power poisoned everything. Theories spiraled. Some believed Ron's death had been murder, carefully staged to look like an accident. Others suggested Mary herself had concocted the letters to cover her own secrets. Still others whispered about a larger conspiracy. Corruption in the school system, even law enforcement involvement. Investigators, under mounting pressure, struggled to keep credibility. Critics accused them of tunnel vision. Others argued they had overlooked key evidence. And as the years ticked by with no arrest, the Circleville letter writer became less of a suspect and more of a phantom, haunting both the police and the town. Leads collapsed. Every promising clue seemed to wither. Handwriting tests contradicted themselves. Witness memories faded. The deeper investigators dug, the more elusive the truth became. It was like chasing a shadow, always visible, never tangible. Then came a breakthrough. In 1983, Mary discovered a crudely made booby trap along her bus route. A sign had been posted with yet another accusation against her. When she tried to remove it, she found it was attached to a gun rigged to fire. The trap malfunctioned, sparing her life. But it was clear the writer wasn't satisfied with words anymore. The gun was traced back to Paul Freshour. Investigators seized the opportunity. Paul admitted the gun was his, but claimed it had been stolen from his garage. To police, it was enough. In 1984, Paul Freshour was arrested and charged with attempted murder. During interrogation, Paul maintained his innocence. He insisted he had nothing to do with the trap, the letters, or Ron's death. But the web of suspicion was tightening, and Paul's protests fell on deaf ears. The trial became a spectacle. Prosecutors presented the gun as the smoking gun. They argued that Paul, bitter from his divorce, had sought to destroy Mary's reputation and family. Handwriting experts testified that the letters matched his style. Paul's defense countered that the evidence was circumstantial at best. But the jury was swayed. Paul was convicted and sentenced to 7 to 25 years in prison. Circleville exhaled in relief. Surely the nightmare was over. Surely the letters would stop. But then, impossibly, the letters continued. Hundreds more arrived, even addressed to Paul himself, while he sat in solitary confinement. Guards insisted he had no access to pen, paper, or visitors. And yet the venomous notes kept pouring in. The conviction, once seen as a triumph, now looked like a grave mistake. Paul never confessed. Until his death in 2012, he maintained his innocence. He insisted he was framed, that someone had planted his gun at the booby-trap scene, and that the true writer was still free. Many believe him. Others remain convinced he was the author all along, clever enough to smuggle out letters despite the prison restrictions. The legacy of the Circleville letters is as much about the unanswered questions as the crimes themselves. Did Ron Gillespie die in an accident? Or was he silenced? Was Paul Freshour a scapegoat, or the mastermind? And how did the letters continue under impossible circumstances? For Mary, the scars lingered. She eventually retired from bus driving, her life forever shadowed by whispers she could never fully silence. For the town, the letters left a permanent stain. Circleville, once a place of trust, would forever carry the memory of betrayal. The questions remain. Who had such intimate knowledge of so many lives? Who could weave paranoia so effectively that neighbors turned against each other for nearly 2 decades? Was it one person or several? A secret conspiracy, or simply a single bitter hand with a pen? The Circleville letters left more than fear. They left a cultural imprint. The case remains studied by criminologists and journalists as one of the most bizarre examples of psychological warfare in American history. In Circleville, it's a story parents still tell in whispers, warning children that sometimes the most dangerous weapons aren't knives or guns, but words. And so the mystery endures. Thousands of letters, a suspicious death, a failed murder attempt, a man imprisoned who may have been innocent, and a faceless figure laughing in the dark, knowing their secret was never revealed. Somewhere in Circleville's history, someone still knows the truth. And until that truth emerges, the town will always live under the shadow of the letter writer, a ghost who proved that even words, when sharp enough, can kill.